This week, we have Jay Readey, who lives in Chicago. Jay was a founding board member of the Chicago Randonneurs and is now serving as president. He started long distance riding at a remarkably young age. He did his first centuries at the age of 14, his first double at 15, and his first 24-hour ride at 16. At 19, he set a distance record of 373 miles at the Michigan 24-hour Nationals and qualified for Race Across America. He then pretty much took a 32-year hiatus and came back as a randonneur in 2023 at the age of 51. Unfortunately, due to a number of mishaps, he ended up DNF'ing PBP in 2023. Jay, it's a complete pleasure to meet you. I know we've exchanged a lot of emails over the last year, so it's lovely to meet you in person.
Yes, thank you, Peter. I'm a huge fan of your show, and I've really enjoyed all of the interviews. I think I told you I've listened to some of them 2 and 3 times, and all of them at least once, and I love every single story. So
Wow.
it's
Okay,
great to
that's
be a
good.
part of this. Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's definitely not nice to meet you then. Okay, cool. Great. I'm going to start with that first question that I always ask. What does PBP mean to you?
Yeah, I love PvP as a ride and what it means to cycling as a sport, as an institution. I think of it as the granddaddy of them all. And for me, getting into riding, when I was 14, I first rode the Tour of the Scioto River Valley. They called it Tosserve. And I rode it for 6 consecutive years, and it generally had 6,000 to 6,500 riders during those 6 years. It was really the heyday of Tosserve. And to me, that was growing up the granddaddy. And I loved every minute of it. The size of the rest areas and the size of the pace lines and the packs that were out there riding. And PvP feels like the global version of what I'd experienced as a teenager in Tosserve.
Yeah, that's cool. So Tosserve, I must say, I had not heard of it, but it had its heyday. Is that correct? With thousands and thousands of people, and
Yeah.
is it still going on now?
No, and it was one of the oldest mass rides in America. It was older than Ragbri and got to those thousands. It went from Columbus down to Portsmouth, Ohio, on the Ohio River and back. And now those roads are just overwhelmed by traffic, and so the attendance declined over the years, and the roads got more difficult to ride on and more difficult to have police coverage across the length of the ride. And so I think it just wound up with its last version last year.
Wow.
And it had always been on Mother's Day, and then they moved it at some point to the fall, and then finally closed it down and said Tosser has had its day. But I miss it,
Yeah.
and now I'm happy to be a part of PBP that seems to be going through those same halcyon days.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. There's two local rides. So I used to do the Marin Double Century every year for maybe 8, 9 years, and that was my thing, right? And then
Yeah.
they just stopped offering it. So they still have the Century, but they don't have the double. And then the Terrible Two, which is another double century, it's now only happening every few years, which is very
Hmm.
sad because they were such
Yeah.
iconic rides, you know. Anyway,
Yeah.
I blame gravel. Is that the problem? Right there.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Well, there's changes in the world and changes in the way we ride. I think PBP just going every 4 years and being able to modify its route gives it this survivability and this anticipation that it can always be great. And I love that
That's
about
true.
it.
That
Yeah.
is so true. Cool. Well, let's go back to the start. Do you remember the first time you rode a bicycle, Jay?
Yeah. So it was very near the beginning. I was a late bloomer. I think I was 6 or 7 before I learned to ride a two-wheeler.
Yeah.
And we lived on a cul-de-sac. And I used to ride. I had a little yellow banana seat bike. It was probably a Huffy. And we had a little patch of grass in the center of the cul-de-sac. And I would ride around and around and around for what seemed like hours. And it just feels like that was a sign that this distance stuff was meant for me, even at a young age. And I always
Yeah.
loved riding a bike. So I started riding that bike a mile to elementary school and then would ride to high school, which was a couple miles. And along the way, people got to know that I was a bike guy and I liked to go places on bikes. And so that was became a part of my identity very early on. And I discovered more and more places to go on a bike.
That's so cool. And like, what was it? Was it the exploration? Was it just the physical aspect or just the stimulation? Like, why were you so drawn initially?
I think it's both of those. I think
Yeah.
that I think that the freedom that my parents gave me to go out into the world and explore it on a bike, and this is before the age of GPS tracking, before the age of cell phones,
Yeah,
was an incredible way to experience the world. And the first real ride was less than half a mile back and forth to the library to check out
yeah,
books. But I would do it all the time, and the distances just kept expanding. And I tell the story, Columbus, Ohio, where I grew up, is sort of shaped like a crosshair bullseye in a gun
yeah,
sight. So I-270 is the outer belt highway that runs around the outside, and I-70, Interstate 70 crosses east west, and there's a State Route 315 that more or less goes down the vertical center, paralleling the Olentangy River. And we would drive down the highway. I'd be with my mom. I was still a kid, but could see these people on walking paths, jogging paths, biking paths. There was a little Antrim lake and a bike path along the river. And I said, I want to try that. When I was 12 years old, a group of friends and I got together and decided we're just going to go find our way to the end of that and back, the north tip, right where it met I-270. And we worked our way across Ohio State's campus to the river, and then found that the urban planners hadn't figured out how to connect all the paths. So there would be a half mile here and a quarter mile there, and we'd
huh,
have to climb upstairs with our bikes and then find our way into the neighborhood and then back to the river and out to High Street, the busy road, and then back to the river. And it took us all day. It turned out to be a 26-mile round trip, and I did it over and over during my teenage years. But
yeah.
as a 12-year-old, we would spend 8 or 9 hours with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in little like Tootsie Roll handlebar bags with water bottles from the soccer field that would leak and make our sandwiches all wet and mushy. But it was unforgettable and just a
Yeah.
great way to see the world and enjoy a day with friends.
Yeah, like very similar. I had the exact same experience growing up in a much more rural setting, but just the fact that you were not connected as well was a thing. You were out there in
Yeah.
the world, just no one knew
Yeah.
who you were, and everything was new and just fascinating, you know?
Yeah. And we got lucky. I don't remember major mishaps when we
Yeah.
were out there, which is great. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. So then what was your next kind of you started building up the miles essentially and doing different
Yeah.
events at a very
Yeah. So
young age.
I was riding a bike a lot just around town, and I started running cross country in middle school. So I was running and biking and very active and exploring the world around me. And people knew I was into bikes, and they said, you should talk to Tom. He and his dad do this thing every year called the Tour of the Scioto River Valley.
Yeah.
And that was the other big river in Columbus, and it went all the way down to the Ohio River. And there was this ride on Mother's Day weekend called Tosser, the Tour of the Scioto River Valley. And I said, sure, I'd love to do that. And I signed up and I went out to do it with very little preparation. And you spend the night on the floor of a gymnasium down in Portsmouth, and then you ride back 105 miles the next day. And we got to about 50 miles, and Tom dropped out and got into his mom's car. And I was like, what? I thought you'd done this before. He was like, well, I don't do the whole thing. And for me, that was just, there was no way I wasn't going to ride the whole thing, but I
Yeah.
had never shifted gears. So I had the little stem shifters that were up at the handlebars, and I had never brought them out of this vertical position. So I was probably riding like a 4213 or 4212. And that was the only gear I had ever ridden in until we hit the hills in Waverly. Maybe it was before that, 30 or 50
Yeah.
miles. We hit some hills, and Tom's dad taught me how to shift gears. And I just remember thinking, this is amazing. I
Yeah.
can calibrate my effort to the hill, and I don't have to walk these hills. I'm not slowing down. I'm not getting stuck. And I just felt like one more thing, I have all this control over the way that I process through the world. And the hills were gorgeous. So I'm a big guy. I was pretty skinny back then, but I've always loved riding hills, even though now I ride them like a sack of potatoes.
You know, it is funny. Like, I remember the first geared bike I had, it was my brother's bike, and I had my eye on it, and then he eventually gave it to me. But I just remember shifting gears, and it just felt, wow, just as incredible, wasn't it? You know,
Yeah. So it
the
was friction
choice.
shifting. So it was like driving a
Yeah.
stick shift car, right? So you're finding the right setting and
Yeah.
cruising along. And yeah, I just figuring out how to be in the right gear for the terrain just felt magical to me.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, continue on then. As a younger person, you're adding more and more miles. It's crazy.
So TOSSERV was run by the Columbus Council of American Youth Hostels, and it had
Mm.
this really well committed group of cyclists and leaders, one of whom was, I remember his name was Dick Seabody, who was one of the early figures in American randonneuring back when it was called International Randonneurs. So Columbus was on the map. And I never really picked up on that. But the same people that I knew through AYH, American Youth Hostels, and through TOSERV were the people who were getting other folks into randonneuring. And they would ride metric, or not metric, but what people now call imperial centuries, but to me was just a century ride just about every weekend. So by 15, I was trying to do one every weekend. And by 16, I was doing one on Saturday and one on Sunday most of the cycling season. And that's
That's
what got me
crazy.
to the double century and to the bike marathon of Columbus, which was a 24-hour ride. So when I was 15, I did the bike marathon, but my only goal was to do a couple of night loops. And so I had the bike all strung up with lights and a big 6-volt battery and the water bottle cage and halogen lights on front and rear, and felt like, oh, wow, this is high tech that I'm putting all
Yeah,
these pieces together. And it works. I've got the light on when I'm riding in the dark. And I loved it. And I just, and there were some inspirational older riders who were putting in serious miles on those rides. And I just thought, that is so cool. And as I
yeah,
started doing all these century rides, I'd hit 70 miles and other people would start to flag and slow down. And I'd feel like I caught a second wind. And I learned from high school athletics that I was all slow twitch muscle fibers. So I was
yeah,
made for endurance sports. And it just felt like the long rides were fit for me, but also they showed me the world, right? They allowed me
yeah.
to explore Ohio. I used to joke, if you took me in a helicopter with a bicycle and dropped me anywhere in the lower southwestern 3/4 of the state, I could ride for
Yeah,
20 minutes and find a road that I recognized
yeah.
because I was
That,
just all over the place.
I get you. And then Jay, like, were there any other 15, 16 year olds doing what you were doing at that time?
Boy, in Illinois, there was this kid, Tommy McKenna, who lived near Lon Haldeman and
Yeah,
who set blazing paces in the Race Across America qualifiers. But so I was following him from afar and pretty impressed, but did not have peers. I had peers who I rode with, I suppose, but not that
yeah.
kind of mileage. So it'd be a different friend on each century. And it was mostly adults. It was mostly really thoughtful, caring older mentors, which was a great way for me
That's
to get into riding.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Like, I think a lot about in America in the 80s, they had that kind of golden age of biking, there was this boom or whatever, breaking away, etc.
Yeah.
Did it
Yeah.
feel very, you were part of this kind of subculture that was kind of cool and European, that was different from all your friends? How did it feel?
Yeah. I did like that. You know, Columbus was a great center for riding in America,
Yeah.
which I thought was awesome. But it was also 1986 was the year that Greg LeMond first won the Tour de
Oh,
France. And
yeah. Yeah.
I thought that was CBS's best coverage that anybody's ever done of the Tour de France. And shout out
Yeah.
to John Tesh. That music is the soundtrack of my life on a bicycle.
Yeah.
And so I was into every element, the French language, the music, the breaking away, so the Italian language, the and it got me to the wide world of sports and Lon Haldeman, the Race Across America, which I think was first televised in 84, 85. But I was picking up on that stuff too and was just enchanted by the stuff that these other Midwesterners were doing with
Yeah.
ultramarathon riding.
So, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, you kind of burnt out. Isn't that right? Tell us
Yeah.
about that.
Well, so not before you always ask about how people first discover PBP. And I
Oh,
think that's a
there
fun
you
part
go.
of the story.
Hey, you know this interview process better than
Yes.
me, so go ahead. Okay.
I love your series.
Okay. Let me
And
try that again then. When did you
yeah.
first hear about PBP?
So the freshman year in high school, I
Yeah.
discovered that the library had every issue of Bicycling magazine back to its very beginning when it was some kind of newsletter in the 70s. And I would go to the library every morning at the beginning of school and check out one day's issue and put it inside my books like I was Jeff Spicoli in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And
Yeah.
so I got immersed in the history and the culture of cycling and found Lon Haldeman. And
Yeah.
so 15 was the year that I started riding longer and longer. And there's Lon Haldeman in Paris. And Scott Dixon is the fastest American rider, and he's from Columbus, Ohio. So all this stuff is resonating with me. But for me, it was like, oh, that's so far away. And maybe I knew that Lon and Scott were super fast, but it still felt kind of like touring. And I got obsessed with the Ultramarathon Cycling Association, and I wanted to race, and I wanted to race these distances, and I wanted to qualify for RAAM. And I did that. That became my goal. And it was 1991, the next cycle for PBP, and a bunch of Americans started to go out there. But again, for me, this is too far for a Midwestern kid in high school or maybe my first year of college. And this is my year to qualify for RAAM and to have that great ride in the Michigan 24-hour nationals. And then I got through that RAAM qualifier and I was just like, ooh, that hurt, right? Like my neck hurts. I'm
Yeah.
skinny. I don't love the way it looks on me. I got
Yeah.
frustrated with flat tires and the cycle computer. You know, you hit a day with a bad headwind, and I'm looking down at the thing and I'm only doing 12 miles an hour. And
Yeah.
it's killing me inside. And so I did burn out, and I thought I need a team sport. Even though I had all these supportive adults, I need something with other age peers. I want
Yeah.
to put on some weight. So I wound up rowing heavyweight crew in college and probably putting on
Okay.
30 pounds that from 19 to 20. And
Yeah.
now I've added 50 more since then. So,
Nice. Okay.
so, but yeah,
Uh,
I put on some weight and I still rode bikes, but never
yeah.
more than 70 miles in a day.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. We didn't talk about your father, but we will talk more about him. But he was extremely supportive to you. You sent me
Yeah.
some lovely photographs of you and him when you were riding for the very first time. Did they think it was odd that you just kind of said, well, that's it, I'm not going to go riding anymore, find something else?
No, I don't think so. I think
Okay.
so. It was the summer I was 19 that I qualified for RAAM and had this great set of rides. But the summer I was 18, there was a real question: do I want to take a year off and just pursue ultramarathon cycling, or do I want to go to college? And I decided then, and so this was probably the precursor, sort of moving into the mainstream of life from where I had been. I decided then I wanted to be in college with my peers,
Yeah.
and I don't regret that decision. They had been super supportive. And I can remember I went to a marathon event in Indiana one year with a guy they had never met, an adult. And I didn't call them when I got to Indiana before I started the ride. And then I
Oh,
started
God.
the ride and I didn't call them from the ride either. So I think I didn't have a cell phone. They went 24 hours worrying about me. And then finally
Yeah.
I remembered to call and they were kind of mad, but they still let me do these things. And that was
Amazing.
but my dad was the support crew for some of those supported rides. And
Yeah.
as we looked back on it during the last year of his life, which was 2023 with PvP, we felt like those were some of the closest times that we shared, father and son, which
Yeah.
was really special
Amazing.
that he had that place in my cycling journey.
Yeah. Um, and Jay, I'm very interested in that kind of obsession you had until the age of 20, 21, whatever. And then it seems like you were able to continue riding, but just
Yeah.
not as obsessively. Is that right?
Yeah. So I said one of the things that got me out of the sport was that my neck really hurt. And
Yeah.
I thought it was like chronic. I was in addition to being a Lon Haldeman fan, I was a Michael Shermer fan, and I knew about
Yeah.
Shermer's neck and was just petrified. I thought, oh, if I do that long distance stuff, I'm an easy candidate for Shermer's neck. And
Yeah.
and when I would do a 70-mile ride, my neck would be stiff and sore for 2 days afterwards. So I thought this is just insoluble. And one of the things I've learned as I watch other people, young parents and people who ride long through the years that I wasn't, as I watch people figure it out, I realize most of the physical problems are solvable. Most of the logistical problems are solvable. The time management problems are, riding makes you better at managing the rest of your time because you care about fitting it in with the rest of your life. And so I think there's some great parents out there. When I was a young parent, I was just like, I probably couldn't do that right now. And that lasted all the way until my kid hit the end of high school. But now, as I watch Josh Haley in Ohio, or what's Paul's name down in Florida, whose daughter is going to ride PvP.
Don't know. Yeah.
Paul Roselle,
Okay.
and Phil Fox in Chicago. I just know from Facebook and from spending time with them that they're very involved parents, but they're
Yeah.
also fitting in the long distance riding. And I could have done it, but I didn't. And it was
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
I reconciled when I came back to it.
So fast forward to 2022 really is when you start getting kind of back into thinking about it, isn't that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
So I
what happened?
turned
What happened?
50.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I turned 50 at the beginning of 22 and decided I was going to take Lent as a sabbatical from Ash Wednesday through Easter. 40
Okay.
days and 40 nights. I was going to hike 10 miles a day
Yeah.
between my home in Illinois and where I had grown up, a little cabin my parents had in southeastern Ohio, in the Hocking Hills, where I had spent a lot of time near a church camp. And various things got in the way that I can talk about in another storytelling. But
Mm,
the miles that I didn't finish, I probably did 80 miles on each end as a hiker with a little bit of biking mixed in. And I decided, from South Bend to Cincinnati, it's not very interesting hiking. The hills and the shores of Lake Michigan are not part of that. I'd rather do it on a bike. So Easter came around, my sabbatical was over, and I decided, well, I'm going to start riding more so that I can find the time. And now I feel like I could do South Bend to
yeah.
Cincinnati in a day or two. But I got into riding with the Major Taylor Cycling Club of Chicago, which is one of the biggest and strongest clubs where I live. And it was just like a new lease on life. I was back in as a cyclist much more. I had always ridden 1,000 miles a year or more,
Yeah.
and I rode to work, and I rode to school, I rode to the train, I rode to the grocery store. But now all of a sudden I was riding in group rides and I was wearing the kit and I was back into cycling. And late in that year, I remembered that I always enjoyed riding at night with the lights on. And I bought some lights and I organized a small group to ride a Moonlight Madness Century under a full moon, all on bike paths. So we were safe from
Huh,
traffic. And there
yeah.
was 3 or 4 guys that got together and did that ride. And it was a blast. And I got to the end of it and I was like, oh, I forgot
Yeah.
how much I liked this stuff. I forgot how much I liked riding long. And now I'm starting to develop the time that I felt like I didn't have. And I forgot how much I liked riding at night. So that was late October 2022.
Yeah.
And RUSA board member, now Vice President Dawn Peach, is also a member of MTC3, Major Taylor in Chicago. And she was proselytizing about randonneuring and next year's a PBP year. And the first couple times she posted about it, I was just like, nah, that's not something I'm thinking about. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden I was like, wait, why not? I had always had, since I had discovered the Lon Haldeman, Scott Dixon PBP years, had always wanted to do it. It was kind of in the back of my head as a bucket list thing. And here I
Yeah.
am, a relatively recent reconvert to serious cycling, overweight. I had coached Little League for 9 years and eaten 1,000 hot dogs and put on weight. And I was like, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to
Yeah.
ride a century at the beginning of January. And I'm going to do a P12 all year in 2023. And I started charting out when I would do the brevets. I didn't actually ride a 200K since I was 19. I didn't ride that far until April 1st of the PBP year.
That's
And in
crazy.
20 weeks, I got from the first brevet to
Yeah.
Paris and into PBP, which was probably
Yeah.
the goal for 2023.
Jay, just getting back to you and your buddies doing that midnight ride, like it is funny because I started doing this we do this beer tour of Northern California. We started 14
Yeah.
years ago. And I just remember that first year, we were maybe late 40s, we had kids, all of us, and just a sense of freedom. And it felt like we were back being 10 years old on our bikes again. It's
Yeah.
it's wonderful,
Yeah.
isn't it, when you can connect to that again?
It was a joyous rediscovery. And this one group
Yeah.
ride close to my home was everything for me in 22 and 23. It was just a new group of
Mhm.
friends. You make a lot of, as an adult, you make a lot of friends through your kids. And then all of a sudden
Yeah,
your kids move on and those
exactly.
friendships start to weaken. But with
Completely.
bicycle riding, I would meet someone new. And the next thing you knew, we were Facebook friends and we were connected on Strava. And it built up my world in such a special way. I was hooked right away. And then
Yeah.
similarly hooked with randonneuring. And
Yes.
I'll save you the long. I have a lot of long stories about the path
Okay.
from the first brevet through qualifying for PBP and getting to Paris,
Yes.
but we can jump forward to the logistics of getting to Paris. But that 20-week stretch, I met some incredible. You spend a whole day with someone that you just met on some of these brevets, and I still cherish those relationships with the people that I met through Random Europe.
Yeah. I always think it's unusual at our age, perhaps, to spend so much time with other people, and
Yeah,
sometimes they're in very tough situations. It's not a thing that normally a 50-something person would have that in their lives
yeah.
anymore. Cool.
One of my
So
favorite
maybe,
memories on the 300K, a
yeah.
storm rolled in and about six of us were together. And we found our way to a house with a little portico and no one was home. But we were worried we were going to get shot if they heard us out here because we all crowded underneath the roof and sat out that storm for probably 20 minutes. But it was such a memorable experience. Here, the skies are storming and we're all huddled together. And it's still a cherished
Yeah.
memory of being with that group.
That's cool. Okay, so we won't talk about because we'll talk about that again, the
Great.
20-week lead up, but you want to talk about the logistics, also about your father as well, because that's a key part of the story. Yeah.
Yeah, so and that'll come back in the 20-week qualifying journey too, but I was back and forth all the time to Ohio during 2023. My brother lives farther away in Boston, and I was kind of his primary for decision making. He was in a facility that could care for him, but I was there a lot and wound up doing the 600K to finally qualify in Ohio. And connecting with my dad and talking about this route to Paris and remembering how close we were during those support crew years when I was a teenager was such an important part of the journey to
Yeah.
Paris. And my dad was with it all the way, right? He wanted me to get there. He
Yeah.
wanted me to qualify. He was thrilled with the story. So I'd come through in Ohio. I did a couple permanents in Ohio, and I would tell him about one of them went almost right to my cousin's front door in Baltimore, Ohio, from Columbus,
Yeah.
and then back. And he was thrilling to the whole thing, and it was really a part of our fellowship during that final year. And there was a moment where I thought he might pass over the weekend that I rode that 600K, and he made it through and then lived another couple of months. But at the end, he died on August 11th. And my son and I had tickets to fly to Paris on the 13th. And so I'm leaving for Paris, and my father has just passed. And I knew he wanted me to go, and we were going to
Yeah.
push the memorial service off to September. And so it was actually a perfect time to just stop to the rest of my life
Yeah.
and go to France. Actually, you ask about what got people into cycling when they were little. I also like thinking about what's so important to me now. There's still that sense of the boyish running around on bikes, and there's also the sense of exploring the world and encountering things at human speed. But I think for me, there's also more. And this is one that a lot of people don't immediately connect with. But the idea of a sabbatical, which is on a long ride. The columnist Ezra Klein for the New York Times has a great podcast, and he talks a lot about the attention economy. And then at the end of each year, he does a piece about reflecting on the year you've just been through. And I realized listening to his podcast last year during that reflection period that that's what some of the randonneur brevets are like for me is this sense of put the rest of the attention economy on pause for a period of long hours and I go deeper. And I love the initials IRL for in real life, right? Is
Yeah.
that I've shut off this digital world and I'm out in the backcountry and I'm out in
Yeah.
the elements of nature. And so going back and forth to Ohio and thinking about the elemental nature of my father's convalescence and ultimate passing was so bound up in my trip to France.
Yeah.
That was so special and part of why I'm so hooked on it now. We will talk about the
Yeah.
DNF. I am not ashamed of the DNF. I'm not driven by like, oh, I've got to finish. I'm more
Yeah.
driven by I've fallen in love with this. I'm enchanted by it and what it means in my life. And so of course I'm going to do it again in 27
Cool.
and for sure
Okay.
I'm going to finish. But it was
Yeah.
not at all a foregone conclusion. I wasn't really nervous. I qualified at the end of June and I rode 1,000 miles in July or 1,000 miles in June and 1,000 miles in July. So I had really good months. I was riding really strong. I felt good going over there. I had
Yeah.
a cousin who had become a travel agent and opened a little company. So she got us a great place to stay in Paris. Our airline reservations were relatively smooth. I had a little
Amazing.
bit of how do I get the bike over there? It's not clear what the luggage policies are and which airline will get your
Yes.
bike over there. And but the worst part of all was I had gained 80 pounds since high school and I was
Yeah.
breaking frames. I've broken four of them since I got back in 2023. And at that point, leading up to PBP, I had broken one, and it was a Trek frame, guaranteed for life. And the shop had sent it away. And then I was riding a second one. So I had two matching Trek 520 touring bikes that had become my rando bikes. And I was riding the second one and it was ready to go to France. And it's at the shop on the day that we're flying to Paris. And they're boxing it up. And they said, well, we couldn't get your seat post out. It was like lockjaw on the seat post and we broke the frame. But
Jeez.
we're lucky here
Yeah.
because the other Trek frame just came back. So we're going to send you over with a new
Oh
frame
my
and we fit
God.
everything. So we put it together and then we took it apart again and we boxed it up and we sent it over there. And I swear, when I unpacked it in Paris, it was probably me who screwed it up. I think I joked with you earlier. I had worked in a bike shop when I was 16, and I was so bad at assembling bikes that they threw me out on the cash register because I was just too slow. I wasn't worth my salt at repairing
Yeah.
or assembling bikes. And I lost a brass ring for the headset, and the
Yeah.
handlebars wouldn't turn. I couldn't ride the bike 50 feet. And so I wound up walking it through the streets of Paris. There was the list serve for American riders had noted a store that was really helpful to Americans. And I met another American rider at the Arc de Triomphe. And I'm wheeling the bike out and walking. And every time I turn, I have to pick up the handlebars and turn the bike to the next direction I want to point it in. But I made
Yeah.
it there and they fixed it inside of 20 minutes. And there were three or four other
Amazing.
Americans. And we had such a joyous sense of, okay, we're fixed up now. We're going to be able to do this. We're going to be able to ride.
Yeah.
So I rode it around Paris and I was all set to go. And the logistics of getting from Paris to Rambouillet are definitely tricky. Figuring out the train tickets and how you buy them and what the schedule is if you don't speak much French. And I don't. Although I got rewarded for every effort, even just to say bonjour and merci. I I figured it out and I took a couple of dry runs to get out to Rambouillet, first for registration and then again. And then I had my tickets purchased in advance for the day of the ride. But it was a big process of problem solving and figuring it all
Yeah.
out. But at
So true.
least I knew I could get out and ride. And for me, frankly, that felt like half the battle. I had
Yeah.
made it
Definitely.
over to Paris and I had gotten a bike that I could ride. We had talked earlier about the fit. I had had a bike fitting for the first time in my life that summer. And so I was pretty comfortable with the geometry. I had put on aero bars to save my hands a little bit. But when they put the new seat post in the new frame, they marked it with a piece of blue tape. And I don't know what I did wrong. Maybe I was supposed to insert it down to the top of the tape line,
Yeah.
but I made a mistake. And it
Yeah.
felt a little bit high, but I was like, all right, I can still ride this. It feels like I can ride. And
Yeah.
that was inexperience, right? I didn't have enough. Someone else has described him. It was RV Srinivasan who said, I'm like the princess and the pea with my bike fit. And I'm not, or at least I
Yeah.
wasn't then. I've gotten better since then. But so I didn't get that right, but I was thrilled to just get off on the ride.
Yeah. And then I remember you saying you were Group T, which is later on in the day.
Yeah.
And how did you feel at the start line? Were you nervous?
I was so excited. I was a little nervous. Sure. It's a ton of people and there's a lot happening, right? And you have to
Yeah.
still figure out where do we get in line? How do we move around? When do they check our lights? So there's a lot happening. I wasn't so nervous as I was excited. I was also kind of psyched. So I was T111 and it felt like a Terminator number, right? So in the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, they have all sorts of T numbered Terminators. And so I
Okay.
was just kind of pretty psyched, like I'm ready to roll. I've got
Yeah.
my stickers and my bike
Yeah.
plate on. And I loved when we started off that ride. There was still a little bit of daylight. We were the second to T and U were the last 90 hour groups and then V started the next morning with the 84-hour riders. So we were
Yeah.
at the very tail end of the bulge.
Jay, like it must have been incredible just starting, right? Because then there's a new group of problems. But,
Yeah,
it's almost from your childhood. You're now at PBP. Your father has just died, which is kind of very sad.
yeah,
Your son is there with you. It must have been amazing just
yeah,
taking off. Yeah. Wow.
yes. I was
So,
really
so
happy to get to that
yeah.
point.
So describe the ride itself.
Yeah, so I take issue with people who are always talking about don't burn your matches early, because the
Yeah.
early part, it had been a warm day, but the hotter days were still yet to come. And I'll talk more about that because that was one of the things that got me. But I do feel like I wasn't pushing hard, I wasn't hammering, but I felt like let's get while the getting's good. I'm going to ride smoothly and fast and strong while I'm here with groups. I was aware of the caution not to be in big packs with unfamiliar riders in the early miles because there are some really squirrely crashes. And I didn't have that issue. I think I was in smaller pace lines, but I had a blast introducing myself to people. I'm Jay from Chicago. So there will be people who remember me from the ride as Jay from Chicago. And that is absolutely who I will go as
Yes.
in 2027. And so I would say the first 200K went super smoothly.
Yeah.
And I felt good about it. I didn't feel like I was burning matches, and I didn't feel like I should hold back. I thought that because we were farther back, the bulge wasn't a huge factor. The controls were sparse enough that you could get in and out pretty quickly. You could find your bike. So all the things that people tell you to watch out for. And I love some of the riders who say, I'm there for the bulge. I want to be in the middle of it. And I may try to do that in 27. But for me, as a late entrant and a late qualifier and a late picking up, being at the tail end was actually great because I didn't suffer the time delays of being in the center of the bulge. Even when
Yeah.
early on, I think I was picking up some time and moving up some, but I wasn't ever held back by anything. And I can remember, this will become relevant in a minute. I can remember occasionally seeing riders go the other way. And I would think, what are you doing? What could possibly possess you to put
Yeah.
in extra mileage riding back to meet someone or get something? Or I
Yeah.
just, it was incomprehensible to me because we've got so far to go. There's no sense in spending any miles in the other direction. So everything's smooth through about the first 24 hours.
Can I ask you a question? Because you did mention before the first kind of town you went through was late at night.
Yeah.
Tell me about
Yeah.
that. Just the people. Yeah.
So, starting with 1986 and Greg LeMond, I had become hooked on the televised coverage of the Tour de France. And you see these
Yeah.
pictures of, the urban planning, the houses are built right up to the sidewalk and the street. And so everything's really close. And you see families cheering out the second floor windows of the riders. And the first little town outside of Rambouillet that we went through, I think we had a little bit of a turn, and there they were. And it just felt like, yes, this is riding a bike through France, and this is exactly what I came for. I loved it. I
Incredible.
love that
Yeah.
spirit. Yeah.
Amazing. Cool. Anyway, continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So actually, I did pretty well all the way to Carhay. And I think this is not, I call it the four horsemen of my PvP apocalypse. I have
Okay.
four definite issues that took someone who was fit enough to finish, maybe not quite experienced enough, because that's what's going to rear its head with these four issues. But one that maybe didn't make the list of four was I did try to sleep preemptively. So I decided I had succeeded in the qualifying brevets by discovering what someone called raccoon riding, which is sleeping during the hottest hours of the day. And I had as a teenager developed stomach problems in the heat that never went away. So much
Yeah.
so that actually this will become one of my issues. I had been watching the forecast for Brittany and Normandy the entire summer, and it had never suggested that it was going to get hotter than 83 degrees. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to be okay. So back in Chicago, I avoided the hottest times of the day and I avoided riding on the hottest rides. I did most of my training in the mornings and the evenings, but it meant I wasn't prepared for the heat that wound up hitting PBP. And actually, I felt like 83 degrees in France felt like 93 in the States.
Yeah.
Something was wrong with my heat register. But so I was doing the sleeping prophylactically, and I think that I overdid it. Like I never got so exhausted that I had to sleep. And I maybe wish I had saved some of that time. I had caffeine pills and I ride
Yeah.
well at night. So I should have waited until I had to sleep and then
Okay.
gone down and gotten the sleep. But I got to Carhay, and again, the stop went smoothly, and I'm rolling out of town, and I was probably a mile and a half or 2 miles out of town, and we start going down a pretty speedy hill, and I hear my bag. It was one of these tailpipe bags that has a dry bag that pops in and clasps in, and I heard
Yeah.
it drop onto the road behind me. So I
Oh.
knew I had lost my bag, but I probably had to go a few hundred yards farther down the hill before I could slow down, not obstruct any other riders, turn around and go look for it. And by the time I started climbing back up that hill to look for it, it was gone. And then
Oh.
my mind started playing tricks on me. Like, well, maybe I lost it further up there. Is that really what I heard? Did I lose it back did I leave it at the control? So I wind
Yeah.
up, now I'm that guy riding the
Oh.
opposite direction of
I know.
everybody. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? So I rode all the way back to the Carhay control. And I think what probably
Oh.
happened is that the thing skittered underneath a parked car and I couldn't
Yeah.
see it. I'm tall enough that I should have gotten down on the road and looked underneath all the parked cars. Because
Oh.
when I got back to Carhay the next day, after going all the way to Brest and back, they had found my bag. And I got everything that
Amazing.
was in it except a $200 REI rain jacket. So
Yeah.
there are still fast fingers somewhere out there, and I missed
Yeah.
that jacket. But
Yeah.
I got back to the control, and I was wearing a pink Major Taylor kit, and this very nice English speaking volunteer told me that she remembered me from the kit and she knew I had the bag when I rode away from the control. Then I knew it was somewhere between there and the hill where I heard it drop. And I rode back to the hill and I looked again. And at this point, I've lost an hour and a half,
Yeah.
maybe 2 hours. And
Oh.
also, that bag had my reflective vest and my long sleeves and my long fingered
Oh.
gloves, just about everything I would need to ride through the cold of the evening. But I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to keep going. So my four horsemen, I'll just give you the preview, are bag, breast, heat, and seat. And so that's
Okay.
the first one. The first one that hit was the bag. But then I
Yeah.
rode fairly well. I think, the fatigue was starting to get to me when I got to the top of the Rock Trevezel. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed the stop there. I had some cokes and had my feet up on a lawn chair for just a few minutes. Kept on riding, and then the descent down into Brest is a blast. And I may have mentioned that when I was 18, I was a bike messenger in Columbus, and I
Yeah.
love urban riding. And here's the mistake with Brest is my Wi-Fi at my French hotel was not strong enough to download the GPS directions for the whole ride.
Oh
So
boy.
after many efforts to do it and I wasn't very good, I'm new to this. So I was not great with the little Wahoo element that I had bought. And so at
Yeah.
the end of the day, I was like, you know what? Screw it. There's going to be enough people out there. I'm just going to follow the arrows and follow the crowd, and I'll figure it all out. And usually in America with the brevets, I would walk myself through all the cues and the entire ride, and I'd
Yeah.
know where the stops were and where I was going. And with PBP, I had gotten almost to Brest. And then I was like, well, the way back is mostly the same. I gave it up. The Wi Fi wasn't good enough. I couldn't download it to
Yeah.
my element. So I get to Brest and I'm feeling great and I'm flying. And one of the bike messenger tricks is if cars are slowed down to make a right turn, you pull out around them and go to the left. And
Yes. Okay.
somewhere in downtown Brest, I missed the control doing exactly that. So I'm
Oh
just like
boy.
speeding through traffic in Brest. And I now realize I rode with a couple of younger guys, Americans, and had a really nice chat about
Yeah.
how they were doing and how the ride was going on the way out of Brest. And never did it come up like, hey, did you enjoy the stop? Or what happened at the stop? So I hadn't stopped, but I had caught
Oh,
up to these guys and I probably was feeling good because they were
yeah.
they were like N and Q.
Yeah.
They were letters ahead of me. And I felt like I was doing great. And so I go to the bridge and I take a picture of myself at the bridge that everyone takes the picture of. And I ride across the bridge and I'm going up the long climb out of Brest. And now I'm starting to scratch my head like, I must have missed it. And I talked to this German rider and I was like, where's the rest stop? Where's the control? And he said,
Yeah.
oh, you must go back. You must go all the way back to Brest. And so I lost
Oh,
another hour turning
yeah.
around and riding
So,
back down the hill and across the bridge.
yeah. So, Jay, do you think that, first of all, you lost the bag, right?
Yeah,
And then losing your way, it's because your brain really isn't making good decisions at that point. You're
absolutely.
fatigued.
I
Yeah.
yes,
It's,
yes.
and you generally just end up making the wrong decision. That's what
And I
happens.
was I was on a teeter totter
Yeah.
where like 1 minute there's this conceit where it's like, if you take out those big errors, I really got to Brest in about 40 hours.
Yeah.
And
Which
so
is
I could
great.
do 40 hours back and before, which
Yeah.
you can't do, right? It doesn't work that
Yeah.
way statistically. But in my mind, I could ride a reverse split. I think at this point, I'm probably at about 46 hours. I don't remember exactly when I left Brest, but it was more than half of the allotted time. And so
Yeah.
I'm teeter tottering between I can still do this and, oh, I'm dejected because these things are really knocking me out. But one of the great rando moments was when I did get back to the Brest control. I said, I need to buy a reflective vest for the night. Do you still have any? And they
Yeah.
said, well, we never really carried them, but we just sold our last one a few
Ah,
minutes ago. But these other people overheard me. And so an American writer, Pierre Payette from Boston, who's become a good friend, and we're both excited about 27,
yeah.
had an extra one in his dad's car who was there to help at the. So they gave me the vest and some long
Amazing.
sleeves that he's much smaller than me. It barely fit,
Okay.
but I could sort of stretch into this thing and get long
Yeah.
sleeves that came halfway down my forearms. And then this British woman who was abandoning at Brest gave me these gloves, and she and I remain in touch to these day too.
Amazing.
So maybe a
Amazing.
hat too. So I had a hat and gloves. I rode in shorts all night, but it didn't really get that cold. So I had the
Yeah.
vest, the long sleeves, and the gloves that I needed to get back to Carhay and back to daylight. And
Yeah.
so then I set out and I'm riding. And this is where in Noah Schwartz's his account with you, I'm Joe from Chicago. So he protected the innocent. But I was so
Oh, yeah.
proud that I made his account, right? He's like, if you think you're feeling bad at this point, I was with this guy from Chicago who had all these mishaps and was way behind, right?
Yeah. Well,
And
there
and
you
he could
go.
tell
You
I
were.
had this sort of
Yeah.
nervous energy. Yeah.
Yeah. Just so you know, so Jay, we're 11 minutes left. So let's just
Okay.
finish
Yes. Go.
finish PBP. We'll do part two on the rest of it. Okay. So
Thank you.
11
I
minutes to
love it.
finish. No, no
Okay.
problem. This is
So
great. Thank
to
you.
get through PvP and my three tips, even though I didn't finish. So
Yeah.
we've gotten through bag and Brest. Then the heat really started to set in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I started taking longer and longer breaks. And that's where I wish I had saved time earlier
Yeah.
because I needed the sleep time or the break time in the shade during the very hottest part of the rides, which is again why I
Yeah.
believe in the get while the getting's good and then slow down when the heat is so bad. And
Yeah.
so I hadn't prepared for the heat. That was a mistake in preparation that I won't make again. So now I seek
Yeah.
out rides in the heat and figure out, all right, what are the coping strategies? What else do I need to do to get through this? And then the
Yeah.
last one was the seat. So
Mm.
I'm now falling further and further behind the pace. And I sometimes joke that I was DFL, which is a acronym for dead last. And
Yeah.
but it turns out there's always some guy
Always someone.
15
Yeah.
miles behind sleeping in the middle of the road. Right? I learned that I was never near the very tail end, but I was getting close to the end. And in fact, I have a
Yeah.
picture. I got to the control or the stop in Cadillac, and there was nothing left. They had shut the building and put all the trash out, and it was just absolutely nothing. But at a bunch of the controls, you could still get people to sign something for you. There were still
Yeah.
other riders around. You could still get food and drink. So there's this sort of sense of like, I could keep going, but I'm running out of time.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the name of the tiny little town, but climbing a hill out of another control town, we got to these guys who had been partying for 4 days, and they had tents and cots and orange slices and cokes. And
Yeah.
I was with another American rider, and we just decided, let's stop and enjoy this, and let's lie down on these chaise lounges. And I think I fell asleep without setting an alarm, and that was just
Oh
kind of
yeah.
the end of it, right? It's like, then
Cool.
I can't possibly finish within 90 hours. And the last one is the seat, which I told you was going to come back and haunt me, because at some point I realized, oh yeah, this thing is not just too high, it's like dreadfully too high. I'll tell you, when I
Yes.
got back to the States, I discovered it was 3/4 of an inch too high.
That's
So Princess
crazy.
and the Pea.
Yeah.
So I realized it was like having a mortar and pestle up into my
Yeah.
private parts. And it just
Yeah.
started to like grind everything. And just, I was wrecked. I wound up
Yeah.
coming back to the States and getting like 6 weeks of pelvic floor therapy to fix myself after all of that. And so it got to this point where it's like, all right, I'm not going to be an official finisher. So I think I was right on pace with Declan, who did the last interview with you. I
That's right.
probably
Yeah.
could have finished in 110 hours. He was also in Group
Yeah.
T. So we were probably kind of in the same
Yeah.
space. But I called my son, who was a college athlete, and we're both pretty competitive with each other. And I said, do I just gut it out and put in an extra half a day? And he said, I think you've done what you came here for. And I agreed with
Yeah.
him. And I charted out a route. I went to a McDonald's and I stuffed myself at McDonald's. And I charted out a route down to a train line that could get me back to Rambouillet. And so I
Yeah.
rode about 30 miles off route. I'm all by myself in the country, and the day had gotten weird, hazy. It was just a very surreal experience. I don't
Yeah.
understand any of the road signs, but Google Maps was working. And so it showed me how to get there. And I made it to the train, and I made it back to Rambouillet. And I was pretty contented. My son
Yeah.
and I, we went out for a great steak dinner in Paris, and then went to the top of the Eiffel Tower and bought the
It's
champagne
great.
toast. And I had nothing but positive memories of the French people, the French countryside, the ride, the event, the route. I was
Yeah.
hooked. And one of
Yeah.
the other guy who fell asleep on the chaise lounge was like, I'm done. This isn't for me. I'm not going to come back next time. But for
Yeah.
me, it was like,
Believe me.
oh, this is where I want to be. These are my people. This is my thing. I am
Yes.
set. This was great.
That's yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. You have a great attitude, Jay, because
Thank
when I
you.
was a younger person, it would really piss me off when I DNF'd. But recently I've DNF'd a few times. I don't care anymore.
Hmm.
I
So I
really
have a
don't care.
side story. I'm gonna
Yeah.
write something for American Randonneur about, in defense of the happy DNF. There's still a whole bunch of people
Yeah.
out there who are like, I will sell out and wreck myself to avoid
Yeah.
DNFing. And for me, no, no, no. I still have a life to live. I'm okay. I
Yeah.
DNF and then I come back next time and I do better. And it's all
I,
part
I,
of the
d-
process.
yeah, I did a 1400K in Washington State. It turned out to be an 800K. I got too hot. But then I
Yeah.
remember just riding my bike like 40 miles to join my family, I think in Olympic Peninsula. And we had such a good time. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
why did I even care? I don't care about that stuff. So it was
Yeah.
funny.
Well, and you still
Cool.
rode 500 miles, right? It's
Oh,
something a
well,
lot of other people don't do.
that's the messed up thing, isn't that
Yeah.
right? You feel
Yeah.
like you failed and you've done this incredible ride.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about I've lots of other questions, so I'm definitely going to do a part two, Jay, right? This is
Thank you.
fascinating, okay? I'm even going to ask you more questions about PBP. But let's just end with your three tips,
Yeah.
and then we'll call it for this one, and then we'll figure out the next recording, okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
So,
So for me, this is kind of a shout out to the people who are last minute entrants, or who
yeah,
aren't sure if they want to try it and they want to try it. And so, and I can't give you the three tips that definitely finish a PvP because I haven't done
yeah,
it. Right. But I'm
okay,
confident that I
yeah,
will this next time around. And I'm trying to do all the preparation to leave no doubt. But so one of the first one, with apologies to Phil Knight and Nike, is to just do
yeah,
it. I think
okay,
if someone can ride a century if you can ride a metric century, you can ride an imperial century. And if you can ride an imperial century, you can do PBP. Just a matter of blocking it out. Now, your life may not permit it that year, but if you can figure out how to block it out for your life and do the prep, it is so worth doing. Just do it. So that's number
Okay.
one. Number two goes right along with your podcast, which is immerse yourself. And not just yours, but Rob Hawks and Eric Norris and August Block down in Florida. I watched all these series about preparing for PBP. Oh, I'm forgetting the
Yeah.
name of the guy from Canada who's everywhere. It'll come back to me, but
Yeah.
my apologies because he's one of my favorites. And I met him. I love meeting these people in person, right on rides. They're like
Yeah.
celebrities to me. And but
Yeah.
the reading, the old issues, you can read the entire run of American Randonneur with the tips that people give every 4-year cycle, and you can add them all up. And now it's impossible to read everything out there. But if you go to Chasing Mailboxes, Mary Gersema has sort of done a
Yeah.
compilation of other people who blog about it. And I just think the joy of anticipation of building up to this essence of the sport is so worthwhile. Just spend at this stage where we are now a year and a half immersing yourself in getting ready for the ride and orienting your life toward it and building around it. It's all part of the preparation, and I love that. The last thing for me as a survival tactic and a 90-hour finish tactic is speed matters. And so I'm working on losing some weight and getting faster. But also, because of the preparation and the mileage we put in, a lot of people get used to riding by themselves, but ride with people, ride in packs. Because if you can save 20% of your effort in a draft, then let's say you only preserve 10% of that gain. 10% over a 90-hour ride is 9 hours, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I want to grab a wheel whatever chance I get. And I think the best recipe is to ride with a group that's slightly slower than where you would be. But if you can sit in and rest during part of it and then take your pulls and share in the load, it makes it go by so much faster and it makes it so happy. And so I think people need to ride with groups and do group rides to prep for it and then purpose themselves in PvP to ride in groups as much as they can.
Cool. Jay, three excellent tips, and it's a real pleasure to meet you. That was a really
Thank
good
you.
interview. Okay.
You too.